Welcome to Todd Talks, where I help you design your best life. Not the life that I designed for you, but the life that you desire. Today, I have with me Sheryl Anjanette. I hope I said that correctly. Author of The Imposter Lies Within, which recently launched. She has advanced certifications in neuro-linguistic programming, hypnotherapy, cognitive behavioral neuroscience, and many more. It's a lot of science for my brain. But she also has a podcast, Pause, Leap, Bounce. And she helps people that struggle with imposter syndrome, hence the name of her book. So Sheryl, if you can give a little bit of background about yourself, about your book, and how you came into this space, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, Todd. It's so good to be here with you. Listen, I spent close to 30 years in the business world. I was in the corporate sector, executive, C-suite, the whole bit, all the different positions. And then I've also been an entrepreneur 3 times. In fact, one of my companies I held for close to 20 years. And so I was in the business world, and I got to this point where I realized what I really love is helping people succeed. I like to see teams do well. I like to see individuals do well. I love organizational health. I like to see organizations really grow and expand and focus on their number one resource, which are people. And so with that, I decided to do a deep dive into the integrative kind of healing art. So I became an integrative hypnotherapist, which simply means that I studied and I practiced multiple modalities of hypnotherapy. I'm an NLP master, and I have a printer that's shutting down behind me and making noise. But I'm an NLP master, and then I did a clinical certification in stress, anxiety, and self-regulation. So something that so many people are dealing with, and also an advanced certification in cognitive behavioral neurosciences. All that to say that I really believe in having a lot of tools in my tool belt to help people. And so really now what I'm working with is this intersection between mindset and business. And
Okay.
And so what I found, Todd, is that when I was really working with people and I was trying to help them like you do, work on manifestation, work on really bringing in their true desires, I found that the places where people were really having trouble, where the gaps were with limiting beliefs and, their self-talk and their thought patterns and ruminating thoughts, really had a name for them. And they kind of were under this umbrella that we call imposter syndrome. And so I said, okay, let's do this. First, let's fix the cracks in the foundation before we try to build the house.
Okay. So that's awesome. That's a lot of science and study, but I like it because you're giving yourself tools to help other people. And I agree, we don't focus enough. All of us admit that we have stress, and all of us admit that we have these things, these negatives in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Very few of us take the time to actually do anything about it other than drink, watch TV, try to sleep, play games on your phone or video games, none of which actually solve the problem.
Exactly. There's this huge gap between knowing and doing. And, it was funny because I was just giving a keynote last week in Cancun, and I had all these entrepreneurs there, and I said, all right, we're going to do a breathing exercise. And I kind of explained what the exercise was. And I said, how many of you have heard of this? How many of you know it? And probably 60 to 70% of the hands went up. And I said, how many of you practice this? And all the hands went down. So there's a gap. The knowing is not the hard part. We have the internet now. The knowledge is out there. If you don't know, you can find the answer, right? It's really
absolutely.
in the doing, just exactly what you said. And so imposter syndrome, why do we self-sabotage? Why do we say, I want this, I want this, I want this? And then we sabotage the very thing that we're going after, right?
Yeah, and even those of us that advocate and work on these things and help others with this, we still do it. We're not perfect at it. I still find myself self-sabotaging,
Right.
or having imposter syndrome.
Right.
But then I also have the tools to help myself out of it, but it
Yes.
still happens because we're human.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I was surprised to find this, but a good portion of my one-to-one business, because I do the hypnotherapy as well and NLP, were other healers. Other healers started to come to me, people that are out there doing the work, the coaches and the trainers and the other hypnotherapists.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something that I talk about in my book. So I just wrote the book, The Imposter Lies Within. It's books, as you said, it's out. So it's silence your inner critic, tame your fear, unleash your badassery. And it's a journey. It's 20 pages, 4 parts, and it really takes you from awareness to insight, to alignment, to integration. But in this book, there are a couple things that I talk about that you were just mentioning. So one is a term that I've coined called the healthy zone. And it's this idea that almost every emotion or behavior, almost virtually, can be healthy in what I call the healthy zone, this adaptive place. So is stress necessarily negative?
No.
Not necessarily, right? Sometimes it's a positive thing. We need a little bit of stress, a little bit of tension to move us out of our comfort zone. It's just when it becomes maladaptive, chronic stress, or we end up in ruminating thoughts. Fear. We need fear.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Right? Without fear, we would run into the lion's den. Right? So it's wired into us. So we need that fear in the healthy zone when it's adaptive. So outside of the healthy zone. So doubt's our discernment vessel. Perfectionism, even comparison. Comparison is not a bad thing. Who would we know if we didn't know who we weren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know light because I know dark. I know, what I like because I learn what I don't like. I know a good manager from a bad manager. I know what works with my employees as a leader because I now am understanding what doesn't work when I don't show up authentically or what have you. So comparison is a good thing. So I kind of go through all of this and I get people out of compare despair. And I think there's just a really important piece of this, and it's knowing. It's the knowing, how is this showing up and what can you do about it? So I really believe, Todd, that we can get past imposter syndrome. I don't just believe it, I know it.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, that not everybody has it, which many people will say, I'm the only one. And then they say, ooh, everybody has it. The pendulum swings. And it's always going to come up. It's always going to be triggered. It doesn't have to be, but there's a process to get past it.
Okay. So what is the process? Let's talk process, or talk stories that show the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, just at the high level, the process is a holistic approach. It means inside out and outside in. So what I find is most people that are dealing with imposter syndrome are getting pieces of the puzzle, and they're important pieces. The puzzle won't get complete without those pieces, but it gives us progress. It doesn't give us, transformation. So for example, an inside and outside in, let's start there because that's what most practitioners are working with, are things like, the way our mind gets patterned with habits of behavior and thoughts and self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so we might say, okay, let's work on feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Let's work on the self-talk that goes around that when you feel that fear. Let's work with fear. And that's the cure. You know what? You're feeling like the imposter. If you just do that thing, you'll get past it and you'll have all the confidence in the world, right? But then,
well, that's a step. It's not the cure, but it's a step, a technique to help, but it's not the cure.
Yeah, and it's an important one. But here's why it can be damaging to say that. Not to feel the fear and do it anyway. That's positive. But to say that's the cure. So people that are highly accomplished, in fact, most people, once they become more, become more and more accomplished, they suppress their emotions of feeling like I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not deserving. These are the emotions with imposter syndrome. It's a disconnect between our actual accomplishments and how we feel about them. So celebrities, CEOs, leaders, world leaders even, influencers, or just, somebody that is not as well known, but very accomplished. They have all the degrees, the certifications, they're standing up, they're the expert, or they're doing a really good job. They still don't feel like they're good enough. Now, they've felt their fear and done it anyway. They've somehow managed to push through their fear to have those accomplishments, and yet they come out the other side and they still have that disconnect. They still feel like I'm not good enough, or worthy, or deserving, or my voice doesn't matter. I shouldn't raise my hand. Nobody cares what I have to say. Or it must have been luck, or they're just saying that, or all these things. And so when we tell somebody who's very accomplished, all you have to do is feel your fear and do it anyway, and you're past imposter syndrome.
They've done it.
They feel like they need to suppress those emotions even more. Well, I should be past this. I shouldn't be feeling this. And there's more shame around it, right? Shame. So it's a tough one. We want to understand how important that is as a strategy, but it's not the whole picture. So kind of going back to this idea of outside in, inside out, there's so many techniques to repattern, because it's not just our behaviors and our actions that become habitual, but our beliefs, our thoughts, our self-talk. So we do a lot of clearing, we do a lot of repatterning.
Okay.
But the inside out is pivotal in this. And again, it's not the only one. You need the outside in. If you don't do that, the inside out won't take hold and be a cure either. But the inside out is simply this. Most of our limiting beliefs, and I have another concept in the book called the mind stack. And so I really show how this works, but at the foundation of the mind stack are experiences, experiences. So an experience happens and we're little. And the experience happens and we think to ourselves, I fall down and I drop my glass and my glass breaks and whatever spills, and mommy says, oh, no, that's bad girl, no. And then maybe she says, oh, that's okay, I'm gonna clean up and get her out of the way. And she reacts. My little brain at 3 years old might say, oh, I'm a bad girl. And it's not a big deal, but something else happens because my mind looks for evidence, and I'm looking for evidence to see if I'm right. Something else happens, I say, oop, you see, I really am not good enough. Or my voice really doesn't matter. They say, shh.
The great
meant to be seen, not heard, right?
I have a great story for that. I read just a few weeks back, about a little girl that loved singing, was singing all the time. Her mom loved her singing. She had a beautiful voice. And the mom was at the end of her rope one day and tired and cranky, and the girl just was singing happy. And the mom responded with, stop singing. You have an awful voice. I can't stand it, because the mom was having a bad day. 20 years later, the girl still would not sing because she believed that she had an awful voice. And it all stemmed from that one time of the mom just losing it and telling her that she had an awful voice, and that 6 years old or 10 years old, whatever it was, it stuck.
It's stuck. I mean, it can get unstuck, but it's interesting. My son, when he was 5 years old, I remember I'd read him stories. I'd go into his bedroom and he said, Mommy, what would you like to be if you could be anything? And I said, oh, I don't know, Jonathan. Tell me, what would you like to be? And he goes, oh, I want to be a writer, Mommy. I want to be a writer. And I go, really? I love that. because I have a big imagination and I want to be a writer. And I said, oh, I think you're going to be a writer. That's amazing. And then he goes on to not be a very good speller. So some people just aren't, right? And so it was like grammar, spelling, it wasn't his thing. But he had the imagination. He had just this gift for writing. But what did the teachers do? They'd give him like papers back all marked up. And they'd say, no, you got a whatever bad grade on it, whatever that was. They'd come back and he just shut down. And I would tell him, no, sweetheart, you're a wonderful writer. You don't have to be a good speller to be a writer. That just, But in his mind, he was not a good writer and he still struggles. So I actually need to get him. You need to go into hypnotherapy, I think.
Well, you can tell him this story. So my daughter, terrible speller. She can not spell to save her life, and she knows it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writing, thank goodness for Microsoft spell check and all that. But when it comes to writing, she may not have a clue about what she is writing about. But I tell you what, she has always gotten great grades on essays.
Great.
It's fluff out the window. It's the best BS work. It's the best BS work there is, and she knows it, and she laughs about it. She's like, I have a good imagination. She knows she can't spell well, but doesn't let it stop her.
Good for her.
And
wow.
And so because of that, she's like, that's what they make spell check for.
Yeah, exactly. Good for her. I love that. So basically, when we're talking about the inside out, things happen when we're young, and it creates our beliefs. And then our beliefs inform our thoughts, and our thoughts inform our self-talk. And so it starts to layer in the mind. So I start to believe that I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not deserving. And that becomes my emotional, at a very emotional level, not at a cognitive level. I start to believe this, and it's really buried inside, right? And it's linked to these experiences. And then I start to think about that, and I think, well, I better not do that. I'm probably not going to make it. I'm not good enough, or I'm going to compare myself to someone else who's going to do it better. And then that informs my self-talk. And so now I have this dialogue between my ears that nobody else can hear, but it's a bit bullying, like, oh, there you go again. Why'd you even try? And I'm beating myself up. I always say I never thought I was a bully until I heard the way I speak to myself. But, it's tough. So what we do on the inside out with imposter syndrome, those feelings of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, is we dive into the subconscious and we find the originating event or events at different ages and different stages. We find that child that was wounded, the wounded inner child, right? And we reset those. So in some cases, it was just as simple as what your daughter was able to work out, that my son was not, that he was able to cognitively but emotionally not let go of, was, oh, you know what? Everybody has their different zones of genius. Some people are really good spellers, but they have no imagination. Or it's not that they don't, we all do, but that's not their zone of genius. Some people are really good spellers and good at grammar, but they couldn't come up with an original story. They could just take someone else's story and make it better. This is your zone of genius, So we talk to that child and we get them to really love themselves and believe in themselves and realize that they can have a different perspective and let go of those limiting beliefs at that age and that stage, not cognitively, not at the 35 or 45 or 55 or 28-year-old self, but at that 5-year-old self, at that 7-year-old self. And so when we do that, transmute and transform, the subconscious, is literal, it's non-critical. It starts to believe that, and it models up through the timeline. So we're working from the inside out, and we're working from the outside in, and we get to the end. We get to an imposter-free life. We get to a place where when doubt comes up, self-doubt or fears or limiting beliefs, it's like, oh, that's new. I'm not sure if I can do that, but it's normal to think this way. Let me switch my mind to why I can. And I have this inner confidence that I'm good enough, I'm worthy, I'm deserving. And maybe I'm just learning something new, or maybe I'm just trying something for the first time, or maybe I've done it over and over again, and sometimes I do it better than others. That's okay, that's endearing. And I have a different dialogue in my head, and I kick myself very quickly into the healthy zone if I get out of it.
I like
Makes
that.
sense?
It does. I love that. Teaching your inner child and teaching actually your children about their zone of genius.
Exactly.
That is key. And
Interesting. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I'm really good at interrupting. So not only the zone of genius, but tying it together with the outside in, so that you're working on both directions. I like to use and teach. If you're not into hypnotherapy, you're not into that, but what can you do on your own to find those areas in your past that are the root cause? I love finding the root cause of something, working on the inside out, right?
Right.
Find the root cause that is causing that negative inner dialogue. And
Right.
One of the best ways that I teach to do it when you don't have therapists and others to help you out is journaling.
Yeah.
Is
That's a
you
good
can use journaling to delve into your own subconscious and keep asking why. Why am I doing this? Why did I do that? Until you get down to the root cause. Now, with our limiting beliefs, you teach a method, I'm sure in your book, a method on how to balance and get into the inside out and the outside in.
Yeah. Yeah, I teach numerous methods, numerous. So in the book, I have 20 chapters, 20 exercises. I mean, it's really a roadmap. So it's never just one thing, one
Right.
exercise, but it is this this integration process that happens. You see, because you want to first be aware, you want to gain your own insight. And in those two phases, the awareness and the insight phases, you figure out where you're out of alignment. Everybody's a little bit different. So I have a whole framework with 7 archetypes.
Okay.
And these 7 archetypes, if you'd like me to share them, are, these are a place where people really gravitate. I've noticed that when I share the archetypes, people say, okay, now I'm starting to really get my insight into how this is working in my life. And then once they have that, they can get into the alignment, because now that you figure out where you're out of alignment, you can get back into alignment. So in the archetypes, there are 7. I won't
Okay.
do the deep dive, but let me give you just kind of the 7 very quickly. So there's the perfectionist, and there are 3 types of maladaptive perfectionism. 3 types, and many people experience all 3. There's the people pleaser. There's the master, who's always chasing expertise, one more degree, one more certification to be quote unquote good enough. There's the lone ranger, who has trouble delegating, feels like they need to go it alone. Now, that really comes from, if I ask for help, someone's going to figure out I'm not good enough to do this on my own. You see, that's the maladaptive.
Right.
There is the savior, who feels like they need to always save the day. They are looking for projects and people and situations to save because it validates them. It makes them feel like they're good enough. There's the superhero, who's a big one. This is a big one. Overcompensating, doing way more just to feel like they're going to get to the starting gate to be good enough.
Wow.
And then the 7th one is one that a lot of people haven't heard of. but it's called the Prodigy. Okay, so the Prodigy is that person that feels like they need to go from zero to hero or beginner to mastery immediately. Because that learning curve, that competency staircase, where you're kind of learning, you're practicing something, you might take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but you're learning and you're gaining competency is too scary. This idea of slipping back or not being good enough or comparing myself to someone else and not being an expert right away is so difficult that they will not take on new opportunities, or they'll take them on and then they'll quit, often quit. Now, the quitting could just be an excuse. Something else came up. I have another priority. We get really, really good at excuses and explanations, because when we don't want to sound like we're giving excuses, we get really good at explaining things away. So
I know people exactly like that.
So we have to get radically self-honest, radically honest with ourselves. It's not comfortable, but it's so freeing and liberating to say, oh my gosh, I'm making excuses. What's below that? Usually we have to peel back one more layer. Usually we think we found it, but if we do a little more uncovering and discovering and layering a little bit more, that's where we really find it.
Yeah.
And that's why journaling and a lot of this stuff you could do on your own is really helpful. But when you work with somebody who, it's kind of like climbing Mount Everest, which you climb it alone, you're gonna do the climbing, you're gonna carry your backpack, you're gonna carry your oxygen tank. But you probably want that Sherpa, that guide to go up with you, right?
Hey,
So
I agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I started my coaching practice.
Yes.
It's to help people. With the podcast, I'm giving people ways to do it on their own.
Yes.
But at the same time, offering more help now with the coaching practice to say, look, I'm here to help guide you and work with you, help you find your inner, the inside out, and help you get it to where it needs to be.
So important. So when you find a Sherpa, when you find a guide, when you find a really good coach that you connect with, depending on what you need and what they offer, sometimes you have a few different coaches for different things, but you can get to the finish line so much faster. And there's the accountability factor as well. How easy is it to fall back to old patterns until we break the elastic limit? You know what I mean by that? Where you have a rubber band. Think about that rubber band. You can stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, but it will go back, maybe not to the original shape, but it will go back. The elastic will kind of reform until you just break it. That's the breakthrough. When you break the elastic limit, and I believe we all need accountability for that. We need somebody, it's a collaborative effort. So finding somebody that you trust, that you can be vulnerable with, because when we're getting into these deep emotions, it's a vulnerable place to go. But that's where your strength is. When you get vulnerable, when we can shine a light into the darkness, into the places where you don't really want to go, but as soon as you go and you shine the light, it's like, oh, it really isn't as bad as I thought. Oh, wow. Everything felt so, like one of my clients said after one hypnotherapy session, I've been carrying around this weight for 34 years. It feels like a boulder. And after she said, it's gone, but when is it coming back? It feels so light, but when is it coming back? A year later, it's still not back. So I said, it's Michelle, it's gone.
Well, people always just assume that things are coming back when they make changes. And it's the yo-yo diet experience of life that, we've all been there. I've done it for 20 plus years. Gain weight, lose weight, go gain the weight again, plus a little more. And we do that not just with weight, but we do it with the weight of our emotions, the weight of
Emotional weight.
our life experiences,
Yeah.
the
And we
baggage.
keep layering it on because we think, oh, I don't want to go there. And you know, for somebody that's experienced real trauma, at least in my experience with my clients, because I deal with a lot of the fear is going back into a trauma. I don't want to go back there. Why would I ever go back there? And the truth is, with the right practitioner, you should never go back into a trauma. I never take my clients back into the trauma. We go above it, before it, after it, around it, almost like you're watching a movie. And we are able to clear and kind of reframe, rewrite, get. The best way to think of this is an experience happens. Now, the experience itself hasn't changed. We don't change that. We don't deny it. We don't say that didn't happen. We're not trying to trick the brain.
We accept
we
it.
We have an emotional experience to it because we're shocked. We don't know how to deal with that. Our subconscious mind suppresses it. And then we give it a story. So there's a story there.
Mhm.
Even if it's not, we don't have a cognitive understanding of what that story is. And the story itself is the feeling. So if you think about the emotion being what we feel in the body, the feeling is the narrative. The feeling is the story for that emotion. So what we can do is change the story around how we are feeling that. We can change the intensity and the weight, which I believe you do NLP as well. We can bring that intensity down. We can get a more balanced feel for it. So we're not denying the experience, but we're putting it in perspective. We're taking the emotional weight out, we're taking the intensity, and we're expressing the emotions that have been repressed. Because when emotions have been repressed, it doesn't mean they really are ever going to stay repressed. They're just delayed. And so if we don't take them out and deal with them in a healthy way, then we see them in our lives. We see them in the sabotage. We see them in the outer child acting out.
We also see them in physical ways. We see them in cancers, in heart disease, in liver disease, all sorts of bodily issues.
That's right.
We see them acting out if our bodies want to get rid of that repressed emotion in one way or the other. And if we don't let it out verbally, we get sick. Yeah.
Dis-ease. We have to get our ease back. And so it requires understanding the awareness of that, insight into how it's showing up for each person. And sometimes we think we have the insight, but until we do that deep dive, it's usually there's something more going on below the surface that's been suppressed. So for example, I have so many stories, but one person who actually wasn't a client, she's somebody is a colleague and a friend, but I love her story, so I'll share that one. But she was 3 years old. 3 years old. Her father had passed away while her mother was pregnant with her. So she was born into the life without a father who had passed away. Her mother had lost somebody that she loved. And so she was an only child. She was at this kind of playing at the playground one day in the sandbox, and all the other little kids, daddies were coming to pick them up. And so her mom came and she said, "Where's daddy? Where's my daddy?" Everybody else is like running to daddy, daddy, daddy. She says, "Where's my daddy?" And her mother immediately felt the pain of having lost her dear husband. And so she started to tell her, "Well, you don't have a daddy," but she could hear her mother's emotion. And, daddy's gone, daddy died. And then she couldn't get anything more out. And she started to kind of hit her forehead, and she could see the pain on her face. And her mother couldn't speak because she was so distraught that her little girl was now asking the inevitable question she knew she would have asked.
Right.
And so this little girl repressed that emotion, but she felt it was her fault that daddy had died. It was her fault that mommy was upset. It was all her fault. And she went through her whole young adult life with all kinds of depression and anxiety and eating disorders. And, she was very successful in her career, but all these things were happening below the surface until she did clinical hypnotherapy. And it took her a few sessions. I think she says it was like the sixth or seventh session before, because she would get to that point, she would start to shake and she couldn't go there. And then when her subconscious was ready, she let her in, and they were able to kind of transform that. And that little girl, that 3-year-old, at that age, at that stage, the little girl, not the mother, not the woman, because the woman understood it, but the little girl was able to understand that it wasn't her fault. You see, Daddy had just passed away. People died. And it happened. And she was such a good little girl. And Mommy was only upset because Mommy loved her. And so the little girl was able to now come back in, integrate with the whole person, and heal.
And healing is so important, that emotional healing.
Right? And she never would have understood that on her own. She would have never gone to that without that hypnotherapist, just really working with her and going deep. And yeah, I've uncovered so many of these types of stories. A lot of them are in my book, without, I never give away the names. Very confidential with all of my clients, of course. But that being said, the stories are important because it helps people connect and understand, I'm not the only one. Or maybe I'm feeling all this and I keep thinking I'm going to be able to find it on my own. Why can't I? There is a way to do it.
And you touched on a point that I've actually covered a couple times in the last couple days. And that is that there are many things that we can work on our own, but there are certain traumas, PTSD type situations that you need a licensed therapist to help you out of, because while many of your limiting beliefs, many of your imposter syndrome feelings can be handled by yourself or with a coach, certain ones that deal back with traumas like that little girl, you can't get to without going to therapy. And therapy will help you to finally release those negative emotions that are causing the blockage.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's I'm a big believer in multiple modalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I like to just work with people on the hypnotherapy, help find those and release them, and then pass them off to a coach if I don't have that time in my schedule. And I think that we work together. We work together and we help people get to the finish line. That's all that's really important. So I do this work all over the world. I do it remotely, so hypnotherapy can happen remotely. But ultimately, the idea is that you can get past this. And even though it feels like I'm doing the word work sounds like it's hard, but it's so enlightening and it is so lightening. It is actually the kind of work that each time you have a breakthrough, if you've ever done something that felt a little difficult, you got that breakthrough, or you finished that task and you just feel so good. That's what it feels like. It's kind of that work where you get motivated to do it. It's like, this is hard, but wow, each time I do something, it's like this breakthrough that is just opening up all of the possibilities for life.
Every breakthrough is super motivating.
So.
Well, that's awesome. So how can somebody get your book if they would like it?
Yeah, so if you go to Amazon, that's probably the easiest way. If you're not an Amazon user, I think Barnes & Noble is also carrying it. But if you go to Amazon, online anyway, I have to double check which booksellers are we've only been out, as we're recording this, just over a week now, and we were bestseller already at, believe it or not, in the inner child category. But the book is available in right now in hardback, paperback, and Kindle, and it will be available also in the Audible. I'm recording that now. And if you go to my website, which is just my name, SherylAnjanette.com, and Sheryl is with an S, SherylAnjanette.com. There's also a quiz that a lot of people really like because it's an imposter syndrome quiz that gives you a score and gives you kind of an understanding of how imposter syndrome is showing up for you. So those are the two ways to kind of get to it.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for being on here today. This has been fun.
This has been amazing. It's been such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And I really appreciate it. I hope the viewers that they get on here and go get your book and take your quiz. I'm going to go take the quiz myself, see where I lie. And Todd Talks, design your best life. I am here to help you design the life that you desire. Todd Talks are available on Apple, Spotify, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Like, subscribe, go to Sheryl Anjanette's website, SherylAnjanette.com. And as I always say, have a blessed day.